fair to say that in many cases it's raised, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people feel more religious, i.e. in line with institutional religion. Well, that's all for this programme. After this series, my thanks to Georgina Byrne, Stuart Bell and Michael Snape. I'll be back in August for another series of programmes exploring issues of faith and morals.
Beyond Belief was presented by Ernie Ray and produced in Salford by Dan Tierney. The series researcher was Jane Worsley.
Hello, I'm Robin Ince.
And I'm Brian Cox.
And the Infinite Monkey Cage is back for its summer season. We're starting off in Glastonbury, we're ending at Drodrell Bank, and we're going to lots of places in between. We asked our audience, if you could remove one element from the periodic table, what would it be and why? Aluminium, to save Americans from pronouncing it wrong. The fifth element.
How do we pronounce it wrong?
Never improved on Israeli.
That's the original pronunciation.
Rhenium, because things can only get better by derhenium.
The new series of The Infinite Monkey Cage, starting next Monday afternoon at 4:30 on BBC Radio 4.
It's time for PM with Eddie Mayer. "4 days on, the referendum ructions reverberate across British politics, the financial markets and the rest of Europe. We'll have live coverage throughout PM. Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet disintegrates. Labour MPs are about to meet. Ian Watson is there.
Yes, I mean, what used to be called the corridors of power, Eddie, but power seems to be draining away, not just from the Prime Minister, but from Jeremy Corbyn too, with 2/3 of his shadow cabinet gone. The Parliamentary Labour Party meets in less than an hour. They'll be reporting on whether there will be any blood on the carpet.
We'll have a new Prime Minister in 10 weeks, reporting live Chris Mason.
Dave, for Dexits by September and a summer beauty contest to decide who lands the greatest prize in British politics.
How are the markets coping today? Reporting live from the City of London, Jonty Blue.
Oh, okay. Attempts to reassure them don't seem to be working, with pounds down 3% against the dollar to a 31-year low. The 100 share index is down 2.5%. Things are even worse on the continent, with European shares down 4%.
And what about elsewhere in the EU? James Reynolds.
Here in Brussels, European leaders say they can't wait forever for Britain to start the exit process.
And away from all of this, it's Wimbledon.
Can't wait forever, you know.
Live, and just before 5:30, Della Floyd.
Where there are 8 Brits in action today, including qualifier Marcus Willis. Find out how he's getting on and why James Ward was given a standing ovation on centre court against defending champion Novak Djokovic.
With the BBC News on PM, Alan Smith.
More than half the members of the shadow cabinet have now resigned in a revolt against the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who's faced criticism of his role in his party's failed campaign to stay in the EU. Alan Johnson, the former cabinet minister who led the Labour campaign, has told activists that it had sometimes felt as if Mr Corbyn's office was working against the rest of the party. The Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Owen Smith said he'd resigned with a heavy heart.
I went into this morning's meeting with Jeremy hoping not to resign, hoping that I was going to hear a plan to bring the party back together, and I'm afraid I didn't hear that from him. I think we are at a moment when we desperately need a strong Labour Party.
Mr Corbyn has insisted he will stand in any leadership election triggered by the revolt. He told the Commons it was no time for infighting.
As political leaders, we have a duty to calm our language and our tone, especially after the shocking events of 10 days ago. Our country is divided, and the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind for indulging in internal factioning manoeuvring at this time. We have...
David Cameron has insisted that Britain will not be rushed into negotiations to withdraw from the EU. Making his first appearance in the Commons since announcing his resignation on Friday, the Prime Minister said the road ahead would be far from plain sailing, but Britain was well placed to face the challenges ahead. Reporting from Westminster, our political correspondent Tom Bateman.
There was a thunderous roar in the chamber as David Cameron got to his feet. He told MPs the referendum was one of the biggest democratic exercises in our history. But amid criticism of the government failing to give clear direction following the political earthquake of last week, Mr Cameron said Britain would not be rushed into negotiations to leave the EU. He said a new unit had been set up in the Cabinet Office to start the civil service work on withdrawal, adding once again that it was for the next Prime Minister to trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. He said one of the most important decisions was getting the best possible access to the single market. The SNP's Westminster leader, Angus Robertson, referred to Scotland's vote in favour of staying in the EU, saying if that means a second independence referendum, so be it.
Financial markets have remained volatile in the wake of the referendum vote, with sterling plunging to a 31-year low against the dollar and some share trading temporarily halted. Shares in airlines, house builders and banks were worst hit.
Pretty ugly building.
The National Police Chiefs Council says there appears to have been an increase in the number of reports of hate crime over the past 4 days. The Muslim Council of Britain has urged political and civic leaders to come together to tackle divisions aroused by the referendum campaign. In other news, the mother of a schoolgirl who police believe was killed by a convicted murderer has welcomed a coroner's decision to consider whether she was failed by the authorities. 14-year-old Alice Gross was found in a river in West London in September 2014. Days later, the body of a man who'd served a prison sentence for murder in Latvia was found nearby. The mother told an inquest jury that her family was stunned that a foreign national with such a conviction wasn't monitored or even known. A paedophile who campaigned to lower the age of consent has been found guilty of a series of child abuse offences dating back to the 1960s. Douglas Slade was convicted at Bristol Crown Court alongside his friend Christopher Skeeping. They'll be sentenced on Friday. Dan Johnson reports.
5 victims told the court how as boys they were invited on days out or offered a bed for the night by Douglas Slade or raped. One recalled how men would call Slade's house asking for advice, described as a paedophile helpline. In the 1970s, Slade and his friend Christopher Skeeping were exposed by a national newspaper as leaders of a group called Paedophile Action for Liberation. Skeeping was found guilty of indecent assault.
At Wimbledon, the world #1 Novak Djokovic has beaten Britain's wildcard James Ward in a straight set to progress to round 2 of the championships. Djokovic, who's defending the men's title, won 6-love, 7-6, 6-4. In the women's draw, Venus Williams beat Croatia's Donna Vekic 7-6, 6-4.
And we're back live at Wimbledon before 5:30. If you've only recently taken the trouble to learn the names of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, the bad news is you've got a whole new list to become familiar with. After a weekend when shadow cabinet ministers toppled like fainting goats, this morning you might have embarked on your day thinking the worst was over for Jeremy Corbyn. But more shadow ministers departed during the day. No sooner had the Labour leader announced a fresh new lineup than fresh gaps appeared. Never mind all the names, it was hard to keep up with the numbers. The Parliamentary Labour Party will meet at 6 o'clock. Our political correspondent Ian Watson will have the latest on that for us while we're on the air. First, freed from his desk for the first time in months, our political correspondent Chris Mason.
Eddie, in this era of Snapchat and Facebook, politics maintains a quaint attachment to the letter. Newspapers were deluged with them during the referendum campaign, and Jeremy Corbyn has received 1 or 2 today as well. Free post too, no stamp required, because the writers have kindly emailed the contents of them to us reporters at the same time. Collie and Wobbles have been something of a double act for Her Majesty's official opposition ever since they were whacked in last year's general election. These latest convulsions began in the early hours of Sunday morning. There's a good rule of thumb, you know, at Westminster. When people get fired in the middle of the night, it tends to be the beginning of a story, not the end of it. Hilary Benn got the boots for the shadow cabinet for disloyalty, and by breakfast time, the first of the resignation letters began to arrive. By the time Jeremy Corbyn turned in for a bit of kip last night, there were 11 envelopes in his in-tray, and the postman's been risking a hernia today too. So, who has packed it in as a shadow minister? Heidi Alexander, Gloria De Piero, Lucy Powell, Lillian Greenwood, Ian Murray, Bree McCarthy, Seema Malhotra, and, so I can pause for breath, John Healey.
Jeremy Corbyn pledged to be a broad and inclusive leader, but he's now lost the broad swathe of MPs right across the breadth of the Labour Party, and he's now unfortunately losing a widening number of our Labour Party members and supporters in the country, and so we were left with no other option but to resign.
Also on the list, Vernon Coker, Lord Falconer, Carl Turner, Nia Griffith, Lisa Nandy, Owen Smith, and Chris Bryant.
There's a national crisis going on for our economy and for our country's self-preservation, and we need strong leadership, and I think the Labour Party is the right party to do that on the basis of our principles and our values. But if we go into the general election, there's a real danger that we'll be down to 70 or 80 seats.
And that is the crux of it. These MPs think Mr Corbyn is a loser. I don't use that word to signify facile abuse, but its literal meaning. Given the referendum results and a new Prime Minister on the way, and more on that in a moment, Labour MPs think a general election might happen soon and they could get nuked. Anyway, back to that Corbyn in-tray of resignations. Luciana Berger, Zakia Starmer and Angela Eagle.
I've made a promise, I've done my best to fulfil it. Today I've had to make this decision. Now, he can't lead us into a general election. He's a very honourable and decent man. And I think in the interest of the Labour Party, it's now incumbent on him to recognise that and resign and let the party pick another leader.
The former Shadow Business Secretary's clear emotion there, a reminder of two things. These decisions aren't flippant and do have consequences. The staff in each of these shadow offices finding themselves out of work. A few more names to have walked. Anna Turley, Steve Reed, Roberta Blackman-Woods and Toby Perkins.
Pretty obvious that Jeremy Corbyn was more of a barrier for people voting Labour than an attraction.
Oh, and Jenny Chapman, Alex Cunningham and Diana Johnson. And we're not done yet. This afternoon, 57 parliamentary candidates from the 2015 election called on Mr Corbyn to go. Yes, that's in a letter too. And meanwhile, in a leaked letter, Alan Johnson, who led the Labour Remain campaign, suggested the Labour leader had worked against the rest of the party. So with all these resignations, who on earth is there left to sit on Labour's front bench? Well, former soldier Clive Lewis is the new Shadow Defence Secretary, but missed question time in the Commons this afternoon because apparently he was still making it back from Glastonbury. The Defence Secretary Michael Fallon said,
"Hello, we'll welcome the new Shadow Defence Secretary. I think he's AWOL on his first parade, but we will welcome him and we'll pay tribute to his service in uniform. He will be I note, the fourth Shadow Defence Secretary I've seen in under 2 years, but I hope he lasts."
So who else is around Labour's new top table? Well, Kate Ossamore is the new Shadow International Development Secretary.
I stand with Jeremy. He's been elected as the leader of the Labour Party, and I'm a representative of the Labour Party, and I believe that he has got the right skills, and I must stand with him and stand with the membership.
And Rebecca Long-Bailey is the new Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
We can't forget that Jeremy won last year with a mandate, the likes of which a Labour leader has never had before. It was quite clear that the membership wanted him to be the leader.
And unions, the GMB, Unison and Unite, are all backing the leader too. So to the Commons and Jeremy Corbyn.
Our country is divided, and the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind for indulging in internal factioning manoeuvring at this time.
And yes, that is defiance you hear from Jeremy Corbyn, who despite that groaning in-tray of, well, groans, can lean on 250,000 votes that he hoovered up to land for Gig less than a year ago. So, what happens now? Well, a leadership election that looks certain, and as things stand, Jeremy Corbyn says he will stand. And so it's entirely possible that after all of this, he actually wins again. But then again, pretty much anything seems entirely possible at the moment, apart from getting much sleep, so who knows. Oh, and hang on, I missed a resignation. Kate Green.
Chris, we'll hear live in a moment from Lord Faulkner, one of the people on that long list you've read out, and Ian Watson will bring us up to date with what's happening at that imminent meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party. But we should talk about the Conservative leadership contest, because we've got more information today about how that will happen.
Yeah, so Conservative MPs have been discussing the timetable for electing a new Tory leader, who of course will also happen to be our next Prime Minister. We heard the other day from the current one, David Cameron, that he'd be a goner by October. It now looks like the international lecture circuit may just beckon a little bit sooner for him. The man who manages the whole process of selecting a new Tory leader is the Tory MP Graham Brady. He chairs the Backbench 1922 committee.
The committee unanimously decided that what we should do is, first of all, use the same leadership election rules as we used in 2005, but also that we ought to try to conclude the process as quickly as practical. So we are seeking to, subject to the approval of the board of the party and the full 1922 committee on Wednesday, we will open nominations immediately. We'll see them then close this week as well, with the first ballot take place next Tuesday, and we hope that it'll be possible to conclude the whole process, have a new leader of the party elected no later than the 2nd of September.
In short, what happens is this: Conservative MPs whittle down the list of wannabes down to 2, and then the 150,000 or so ordinary party members choose between the final pair. So, who is in the running then? Oh yes, this man.
Morning. Are you backtracking on your promises, Mr. Johnson?
No, not at all.
Yes.
The questions and scrutiny for Boris Johnson will keep coming. The other big name expected is the Home Secretary, Theresa May. She is, in many ways, the personification of everything Boris Johnson is not. And if you don't believe me, try to create this mental image for a moment. Can you imagine her on a zip wire?
Chris Mason reporting. It's 5:15. The headlines from Alan.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is facing an unprecedented revolt. More than half his shadow cabinet has resigned. They say he failed to provide proper leadership at Labour's campaign to keep the UK in the EU. David Cameron has told MPs that he's creating a new unit within government to coordinate arrangements for Brexit. There have been further falls in stock markets and the pound in the aftermath of the referendum. Shares in banks, airlines and house builders have been hit very hard.
Among the many Labour resignations Chris was talking about, the Shadow Justice Minister, Lord Faulkner. Welcome to PM.
Hello.
What do you understand by the word loyalty?
Loyalty to your party and loyalty to your country. And the question now is what's best for the country, and what's best for the country is an effective Labour opposition.
What's changed?
The result in the EU referendum has meant that the political situation in this country has changed. The country realistically and reasonably expect leadership from their political parties, in particular the leading opposition party. The question that faced the shadow cabinet and will face the parliamentary party in the next few days is, do they have confidence in Jeremy Corbyn to lead the country or lead the opposition at this stage, at this particular time in our history? And the answer that very many members of the shadow cabinet gave was no, they did not. And they couldn't not say that in the end. The dismissal of Hilary Benn on Sunday morning meant that each one of us was going to be confronted with that dilemma.
Why is the failure of the Remain campaign to win the referendum? Why does it necessitate Jeremy Corbyn's departure?
I'm not saying that it does. What I'm saying is that the situation that the country now faces requires real political leadership.
And what is it about him that he doesn't provide that?
He can't give the direction that is required. He can't galvanise the Labour Party right across all of its bits, including the parliamentary party.
He galvanised 250,000 voters last year.
He did, but now the question is what sense of direction can he give to the country? And we in Parliament, primarily those in the Commons, and it's their decision more than anybody else's, have got this country.
Why do you agree to serve under him?
Because I am somebody who has desperately tried to make the thing work. I think the landscape before the result in the EU referendum was very different. It was a person who had achieved so much, transformed the Labour Party and transformed it for the better in very many ways. And a leader trying to get to a point in 4 years' time where a Labour could win the next election is a very different political challenge from a leader who now has got, maybe with an election coming in 3 months or 9 months, having to provide for the country direction in the face of perhaps one of the greatest challenges the country has faced in recent years.
So is it the prospect of a snap election that's contemplated upon?
It's much, much more than that. It is the ability to provide to the country a convincing leadership, because the country, in the face of what happened in the EU referendum, is looking to its political leadership to say that this is how we are going to deal with the issue. Very many people, whether they voted Remain or voted Leave, are anxious about what's going to happen. Also, the effect of the referendum has been we now, as a country, need to find a new direction. What are we going to do in our relations with the European Union? What happens about immigration? How do we deal with what may be an immediate deteriorating economic situation? All of these things need very, very clear and able political leadership.
There are plenty of Labour Party supporters who will tell you, and plenty of other commentators who will tell you, there's a vacuum at the top of government at the moment. They say, well, David Cameron is in charge but on his way out. We're still waiting to see who might be the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister. Is this, of all the moments to choose to go after Jeremy Corbyn, is this the moment to try to take him out?
Well, speaking for myself, I don't think the question of whether the Labour Party has adequate leadership at this time should depend upon what the Tories are doing. The way you put your question, you're saying, well, should we opportunistically take advantage of the fact that the effect of the European Union referendum has been to, in effect, remove the leadership of the Tory party?
No, I'm suggesting that while the Conservatives argue over their leader, why don't you stick with the one you've got?
Because speaking again for myself, I don't think that he could provide the necessary leadership that the country needs, and I think it would have been wrong for the Labour Party, or for me, not to make that clear by resigning, because it shouldn't depend at a time like this upon whether or not we should opportunistically take advantage of the fact that the Tories are in trouble.
Who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport?
It is Mr. Andrew MacDonald.
Who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Education?
That's really annoying when pedestrians do that.
Give me a moment. The Shadow Secretary of State for Education is...
Pat Glass.
Pat Glass, sorry. Yeah.
And the Opposition Chief Whip now?
The Opposition Chief Whip is Rosie Winston.
Who's replaced you?
I don't think anybody's replaced me.
Are you irreplaceable?
No, I'm not irreplaceable. I am most certainly not irreplaceable.
Who should be the next leader of the Labour Party?
I don't know. I mean, I think that the best thing that could happen to the Labour Party now is that Jeremy should resign, recognising that he has a huge legacy for the good that he has left the Labour Party.
Oh, tell me about that.
That he.
Tell me about his huge legacy for the good.
Huge legacy that he's opened up the party to a significant number of new members. He has made the dialogue and the debate that has gone on in the Labour Party a lot more open. He has made the public think that in very many respects he has brought a breath of fresh air to politics. So he really has to go. But he has to go not for those reasons, but because he cannot provide the leadership that the country rightfully expects from its main opposition party.
Lord Faulkner, thank you. Amid all the talk of political treachery, what about this?
Everybody considered you and McLean to be traitors.
A standoff where no one was safe.
If anyone asks you what you do, you'll have to say, I work for the government, and let's leave it at that, shall we?
A series of programmes about the tensions of the 20th century.
As in Europe, so now in Asia. Enemy territory, which had been conquered and divided at the end of World War II, was becoming the focus of the Cold War battle for domination.
Beginning the BBC Radio 4 Cold War season, Bridget Kendall presents Cold War Stories from the Big Freeze. Next Monday to Friday afternoon at 1:45.
We'll be live at Wimbledon shortly. Now, more on David Cameron's statement to the House of Commons this afternoon. Carolyn Quick is at Westminster.
Eddie, while the Westminster personality saga continues, there is, of course, the rather crucial matter of what happens to the nation after last week's momentous result. So, David Cameron appeared here in the Commons. He'd last been seen, of course, on the steps of Downing Street, tearfully announcing his departure. His replacement will be announced on September the 2nd, but until then, he is the Prime Minister responsible for trying to sort out how the UK extracts itself from the EU and at what pace. He's got some tricky face-to-face meetings with exasperated European counterparts coming up. Today, some equally exasperated Conservative and opposition MPs among those listening, though Conservatives did cheer loudly as he entered the Commons chamber. And coincidentally, this was the first day in the Commons for the new MP for Tooting.
When I talk about this House, let me welcome the new member for Tooting to her place. I think I'd advise her to keep her mobile phone on. She might be in the shadow cabinet by the end of the day.
Not even a glimmer of a smile from Jeremy Corbyn, suffering, as we've heard, at the last count, at least 30 resignations from his shadow ministerial team.
And I thought I was having a bad day.
As for the substance of the statement, David Cameron's warned European leaders that Britain won't be rushed into negotiations to withdraw from the EU. He confirmed that it would be for his successor to decide when to trigger the Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty procedure. That's which kickstarts the whole procedure of exiting the EU. He reassured European citizens living in the UK and Britons living abroad that there'd be no immediate changes in their circumstances. He also suggested the country was well placed to face any economic challenges arising as a result of Brexit. And he made clear there was no going back.
Mr. Speaker, the British people have voted to leave the European Union. It was not the result I wanted, nor the outcome that I believe is best for the country I love.
but there can be no doubt about the result. Of course, I don't take back what I said about the risks. It is going to be difficult. We've already seen that there are going to be adjustments within our economy, complex constitutional issues, and challenging new negotiation to undertake with Europe. But I am clear, and the Cabinet agreed this morning, that the decision must be accepted and the process of implementing the decision in the best possible way must now begin.
These Tory benches have been at war. This was their first opportunity to eyeball their foes, although several have tried to reassure that there's no longer two teams here, but one, united now in trying to chart the best course for the country. There were plenty of comments during this statement from MPs and from leaders about the absence from the chamber of the prime leader, Boris Johnson, and the blink and you missed it appearance of his soon-to-be leadership campaign co-star Michael Gove. On Jeremy Corbyn's side, former frontbenchers sat stony-faced behind him. His new team populated with unfamiliar faces, as you've been hearing. A glum-looking Tom Watson, his deputy, slumped next to him. Mr Corbyn insisted he's staying put. And in the spirit of today's statement, he urged government to keep key Labour figures informed about Brexit strategies. But he was jeered over the infighting within his own party as he warned against a state of paralysis before the Prime Minister steps down.
As political leaders, we have a duty to calm our language and our tone, especially after the shocking events of 10 days ago. Our country is divided, and the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind for indulging in internal faction manoeuvring at this time. We have
the government benches erupted in laughter and jeers. Behind Mr Corbyn, many of his own MPs' faces were fiery. They were pointing, they were shaking their heads. One had their head in their hands. Despair was an emotion shared for different reasons by pro-Remainer former Tory Chancellor Ken Clarke, who called for Parliament to be able to vote to decide whether or not to implement the result of the EU referendum. Or perhaps there was some other reassurance measure.
We consider the possible first step of joining the European Economic Area, which was designed in the first place for countries like Norway and Iceland, where the great bulk of politicians wished to join the European Union, but could not get past the ridiculous hurdle of a referendum in order to get there. And that would at least could be negotiated, modifications, changes, if anybody can decide what they want after we get there, but it would give some reassuring order and stability to our economy and might begin to attract a little investment and future prospects for our country.
Repeatedly, Cameron stressed that nothing would change in the UK's trading relations with Europe until the UK actually leaves the European Union, and he insisted that one of the most important tasks for the new government would be to negotiate the best possible arrangements with the single market.
This House shouldn't block the will of the British people to leave the European Union. But of course we've now got to look at all the detailed arrangements, and Parliament will clearly have a role in that, in making sure that we find the best way forward, and that will be principally the job for the next government. But I do believe in parliamentary sovereignty and the sovereignty of this Parliament, and a lot of detail will have to be discussed and debated. But decisions like whether or not to join the EEA must be for a future government.
Carolyn Quinn brought us that from Westminster. Now, anyone for tennis? Dot Davis first reported on Wimbledon for PM in 2005, when an 18-year-old Andy Murray made his first appearance in the main draw and made it through to the third round. Since then, Dot has been our trusted guide for all the tension, dramas, upsets and excitement. But this year, we have to do without her, because in her words, and these are her words, she has a 9-week-old baby girl keeping her busy. Instead of Nadal, she's staring into the gorgeous eyes of baby Mel Agnes. And it's now more mountain of washing than muddy mount, unquote. So no Wimbledon Dot this year, but please welcome Delith Lloyd. Like Dot, Delith is Welsh, it's the law. She comes from Aberystwyth, and this is her third year working at Wimbledon for BBC Sport. She was on PA once before, standing in for Dot last year. Delith's favourite player is Andy Murray, and another sporting matter, she tipped Wales to make the Euro 2016 final thanks to the exploits of Gareth Bale. Delph, you're very welcome. We might talk about football some other time, but 8 British players in action today, plenty for you to keep an eye on.
Yes, Eddie, good afternoon. It's to you. There could be quite a story as well unfolding on court 17, where 25-year-old qualifier Marcus Willis is playing, ranked 775th in the world. He's won 6 games just to get here in pre-qualifying and qualifying, and is playing in the main draw of a Grand Slam for the first time. He's taken the first set against Ricardis Berankis 6-3, and his breakup leads 3-1 in the second. The crowd are firmly behind him, Eddie. I've already heard a rendition of the song made famous by the Northern Ireland fans at Euro 2016. Swapping Will Griggs on fire for Marcus Willis is on fire. Plenty of support for him on what is a huge day for everyone involved with Willis, but his girlfriend Jenny Bates hasn't been able to share it with him.
I'm kind of picky on this one.
Because you're a dentist?
Yeah, they know where I am.
Angry patients. They
Angry
wouldn't be happy.
No, I have to treat them.
Without putting your patients off, when he is playing and you have patients in, and you are in their mouths with all these different tools, are you going to be paying attention?
That's the one thing about dentistry that I love, in that as soon as the patient walks through the door, that's it. You just focus on them. And then it's the in-between. When you're just getting your phone and the Wimbledon app, it sucks your battery.
Superstore!
But you do get the odd patient coming in that knows what's going on, and I had a lovely one say, you know what, Jen, let's leave the treatments today, let's watch the game.
Oh, well, Marcus Willis' girlfriend Jenny Bates there speaking to Lee McKenzie. She's certainly missing quite a match, Eddie.
And Delph, I'm thinking we'll call you Wimbledale, by the way. How are the other British players getting on?
I'm okay with Wimbledon. Well, it's not started too well for the Brits, to be honest, Eddie. Kyle Edmund was the first Brit to fall earlier on, losing in straight sets to Adrian Manarino of France, 6-2, 7-5, 6-4. Then James Ward had the unenviable task of taking on the defending champion and world #1 Novak Djokovic to open proceedings on centre court at 1 o'clock. That match was heading towards a bit of an embarrassment for Ward when he lost the first set 6-love and then trailed 3-love in the second, but he fought back, winning 3 games on the bounce. The crowd giving him a standing ovation when he won his first game. Ward, though, eventually succumbed, losing in straight sets 6-love at 7-6, 6-4 to Djokovic, but felt the first set didn't quite tell the full story.
I thought the first set still it could have been 2-all quite easily. I didn't have body on his serve. Had a few points to win the game when I was serving myself, so it felt a little bit unjust there, but you know, you just got to give it your best effort the whole time and make the most of the occasion, get the crowd involved, and I think it changed.
Can I just say, you were very good at getting the crowd involved. I mean, at one point they were all on their feet and they were whooping and hollering.
Yeah, no, it was good. You know, in that situation when you're 6-love, 3-love down, you get a game, you've got to laugh a little bit, you can't take yourself too seriously.
James Ward there speaking to the BBC's